My name is Eleanor Patricia Hayes, and at 73 years old, I thought I understood disappointment. I'd buried a husband, survived the collapse of 2 family businesses, and watched my savings dwindle during the recession. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for Christmas morning 2024, when my daughter Jessica handed me an invoice for $27,000 while everyone else unwrapped their presents. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that before that morning, I was just another grandmother who believed that family meant something. That blood mattered. That the woman who had raised 3 children, worked double shifts at the textile factory, and sacrificed her own dreams so her kids could have better lives, would always have a place at the Christmas table. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like every Christmas for the past 15 years. I woke up at 5 in the morning in the small guest bedroom of Jessica's sprawling colonial home in Westfield Heights, New Jersey. Through the frosted window, I could see the perfectly manicured lawn, the matching luxury cars in the circular driveway, and the elaborate light display that had probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. I dressed carefully in the burgundy sweater I'd bought specifically for Christmas photos, the one that had taken me 3 months to save for. My arthritis made buttoning difficult, but I took my time. Appearance mattered in Jessica's world, and I'd learned long ago not to give her any reason to be embarrassed by her mother. Downstairs, the house was already alive with activity. My son-in-law Marcus was brewing expensive coffee in a machine that looked like it belonged in a science laboratory. Their 2 teenagers, Sophia and Tyler, were setting up cameras and ring lights in the living room for what Jessica called their Christmas content creation. "Morning, Grandma Ellie," Sophia said without looking up from her phone. She was 16, beautiful in that effortless way young people are, and completely absorbed in whatever was happening on her screen. Tyler, 14 and equally glued to his device, offered a mumbled greeting that might have been words. Jessica appeared from the kitchen, immaculate as always in a cream-colored cashmere outfit that probably cost more than my rent. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and her makeup was camera-ready. She'd always been beautiful, my Jessica, even as a little girl when we lived in that cramped apartment above the laundromat, and she'd dress up her dolls in scraps of fabric I'd bring home from the factory. "Mom, you're up early," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Coffee's ready. Marcus made that Colombian blend you liked last time." I accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping my weathered hands around the warm mug. The kitchen was a showpiece of granite and stainless steel, nothing like the tiny galley where I'd taught Jessica to make pancakes from a box mix because it was all we could afford. Those had been good times, though. Simpler times when a Saturday morning spent cooking together was the height of luxury. "Where should I put these?" I asked, gesturing to the small pile of wrapped gifts I'd brought. Each one had taken careful consideration, not just because of my limited budget, but because I wanted them to be meaningful. For Jessica, I'd knitted a scarf in her favorite shade of blue, working on it during the long winter evenings in my studio apartment. For Marcus, a vintage book about classic cars that I'd found at a thrift store and had rebound. For the kids, gift cards to stores I knew they liked, purchased with money I'd saved by skipping meals more often than I cared to admit. "Oh, just put them under the tree with everything else," Jessica said distractedly, already moving toward the living room where professional quality lighting was transforming their Christmas morning into what looked like a magazine shoot. I followed, her taking in the scene. The 12-foot Fraser fir dominated the room, decorated with ornaments that matched the house's color scheme perfectly. Beneath it, presents were artfully arranged, each one wrapped in coordinating paper and ribbon. It looked expensive. Everything looked expensive. My modest gifts seemed shabby in comparison, their drugstore wrapping paper and dollar store bows suddenly embarrassing. I tucked them discreetly behind some of the larger boxes, hoping they wouldn't stand out too much in the inevitable photos. "Okay, everyone," Jessica announced, clapping her hands together. "Let's get started. Sophia, Tyler, you know the drill. Big smiles, natural reactions, and remember we're going live on Instagram at 9. The next hour passed in a blur of orchestrated joy. Jessica directed everyone's movements like a film director, making sure each gift opening was perfectly framed for the cameras. The presents were lavish beyond anything I could have imagined. Designer clothes, the latest electronics, jewelry that sparkled under the ring lights. Marcus received a new Rolex. Sophia got a designer handbag that cost more than I'd spent on Christmas in the last 5 years combined. Tyler unwrapped a gaming setup that looked like mission control for NASA. I watched from my designated spot on the couch, holding my coffee and smiling on cue when Jessica pointed the camera my way. And here's Grandma Ellie, enjoying her first Christmas in our new house, she narrated to her phone, which was broadcasting live to thousands of followers. The irony wasn't lost on me that this was actually my 4th Christmas in their new house, but accuracy had never been Jessica's strong suit when it came to her social media presence. In her online world, she was the perfect daughter who doted on her elderly mother. In reality, I saw her 3 times a year if I was lucky. "Mom, why don't you open your gifts now?" Jessica suggested, and I realized with a start that I hadn't received anything yet. The pile of presents beneath the tree had dwindled considerably, but I hadn't been handed a single package. "I think there might be some mix-up," I said gently. "I don't see anything with my name on it." Jessica's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Oh, right. Your gift is special. Marcus, would you get Mom's present?" From the office? Marcus disappeared upstairs while Jessica kept the camera rolling, chatting with her viewers about family traditions and the importance of spending time with loved ones. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, wondering what they could have gotten me that required separate storage. When Marcus returned, he was carrying not a wrapped gift, but a manila folder. My stomach began to churn with an unexplained dread as Jessica took the folder and approached me with that same brilliant smile she'd worn throughout the morning. "Mom, this year we decided to give you something really meaningful," she announced, her voice carrying that overly bright tone she used when she was performing for her audience. "Something that acknowledges everything you've done for our family." She handed me the folder with a flourish, and I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not a gift certificate or a heartfelt letter, but an invoice. An itemized bill for $27,438. I stared at the paper, the words swimming before my eyes as I tried to process what I was seeing. The letterhead read, "Hayes Family Financial Services," with Jessica and Marcus listed as principals. Below that, a detailed accounting of expenses dating back 3 years. "Christmas dinners hosted, $4,800, I read aloud, my voice barely a whisper. "Birthday parties for grandchildren, $2,400. Mother's Day celebrations, $1,200. Thanksgiving gatherings, $30,600. Accommodation costs for family visits, $8,200. Miscellaneous entertainment and activities, $7,238. The list went on and on. Each family gathering I'd attended, each holiday celebration I'd thought was motivated by love, reduced to a line item on a bill. At the bottom, in Jessica's neat handwriting, was a note. "Payment plan available upon request. First installment, due January 15th. The room had gone completely silent except for the soft hum of the recording equipment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I looked up to find everyone staring at me, even the kids momentarily distracted from their devices. Jessica's smile had taken on a brittle quality, as if she wasn't quite sure how this was playing out. "I don't understand," I said finally, though part of me was beginning to understand all too well. "Well, Mom," Jessica said, settling into the chair across from me like a patient teacher explaining something obvious to a slow student. Marcus and I have been talking, and we realized that hosting family gatherings is really expensive. I mean, we love having everyone here, but it's only fair that the costs be shared, right? She gestured around the opulent room as if to emphasize the burden they'd been carrying. This house isn't cheap to maintain, and when we host holidays, there are additional costs: food, decorations, utilities, wear and tear on the furniture. We've been absorbing these expenses for years, and frankly, it's starting to impact our budget. I stared at her, this woman I'd given birth to, nursed, through childhood illnesses, and worked myself into exhaustion to support. You want me to pay you for Christmas dinner? Not just Christmas, Marcus interjected, his voice taking on that same patronizing tone. All the family gatherings. We've been very generous up until now, but we think it's time everyone contributed their fair share. Fair share, I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Jessica, honey, I live on Social Security. You know that. I can barely afford my rent and medications as it is. Jessica's expression softened slightly, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the little girl who used to climb into my lap when she had nightmares. I know it seems like a lot, Mom, but that's why we're offering a payment plan. You could pay it off over time, maybe $50 a month. It would hardly be noticeable. $50 a month. She said it so casually, as if she had no idea. That $50 was the difference between me eating properly and skipping meals. As if she'd forgotten that I'd had to choose between my blood pressure medication and new winter boots just last month. And if I can't pay? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Jessica and Marcus exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications that married couples develop. Well, Jessica said carefully, we'd have to reconsider our hosting arrangements. Maybe it would be better if holiday gatherings were smaller, more intimate, just immediate family. The message was clear: pay up or be excluded. Pay for the privilege of spending holidays with my own daughter and grandchildren, or be cut off entirely. I looked at Sophia and Tyler, wondering if they understood what was happening. Sophia was filming everything on her phone, probably for her own social media accounts. Tyler had returned to his game, the new headphones already clamped over his ears. Neither seemed bothered by the fact that their grandmother was being presented with a bill for their family's love. Can I have some time to think about this? I asked, carefully placing the invoice back in the folder. Of course, Jessica said brightly, that performative smile returning full force. Take all the time you need. Like I said, first payment isn't due until January 15th. The rest of Christmas morning passed in a blur. I opened my modest gifts from under the tree, each one received with polite enthusiasm that felt increasingly hollow. Jessica's family went through the motions of gratitude, but I could see them calculating whether the scarf I'd knitted was worth the 40 hours of work it had taken me to complete. I helped clean up wrapping paper and tried to make conversation during the elaborate Christmas brunch Jessica had prepared, all while that invoice seemed to burn through the folder where I'd left it on the coffee table. Every bite of food, every sip of juice, every moment of forced family time now had a price tag attached. By early afternoon, I claimed fatigue and retreated to my room. Jessica seemed relieved, probably eager to get back to her content creation, without the complication of an elderly mother who might not play along with the perfect family narrative. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, staring out the window at the pristine neighborhood where every house looked like a catalog photo and every family appeared to be living their best life. 3 years ago, when Jessica and Marcus had bought this house, I'd been so proud. My daughter had made it. She'd escaped the poverty we'd known when she was young and built herself a beautiful life. I'd never questioned the invitations to family gatherings. When Jessica called to invite me for holidays, I thought it was because she wanted me there, because family mattered to her the way it mattered to me. It never occurred to me that I was being charged for each moment, that my presence was being cataloged and calculated like a business expense. The worst part wasn't even the money. though $27,000 might as well have been $27 million for all my ability to pay it. The worst part was understanding that every hug, every "I love you," every family photo had been a transaction. That Jessica saw me not as her mother, but as a customer who hadn't been paying her bills. I pulled out my phone, an ancient flip phone that embarrassed the grandkids but was all I could afford, and stared at the small screen. I could call my son Robert in California. He'd be horrified by what Jessica had done, would probably offer to help with the money. But Robert had his own family, his own struggles. He was a good man, but asking him to pay for my right to be part of Jessica's family felt like just another kind of failure. I could call my sister Margaret, but she was in a nursing home in Florida, living on even less than I was. My brother James had died 2 years ago, and most of my old friends were either gone or dealing with their own problems of aging and poverty. For the first time in my 73 years, I felt truly alone. Not just lonely, but fundamentally isolated in a way that had nothing to do with physical proximity, and everything to do with the realization that the people I loved most in the world saw me as a burden to be managed rather than a person to be cherished. That night at dinner, Jessica served a meal that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget: prime rib with truffle mashed potatoes, asparagus with hollandaise, and a chocolate dessert that looked like it belonged in a French patisserie. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, while conversation flowed around me about vacation plans and business ventures and social media strategies. "Grandma Ellie's been quiet today," Sophia observed, not looking up from her phone where she was editing videos from the morning's gift exchange. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, summoning a smile. "Just a little tired." "You should consider taking some vitamins," Tyler suggested with the casual certainty of a teenager who'd learned everything he knew about health from internet videos. "My friend's grandpa takes this supplement that gives him tons of energy." "I'll look into that," I lied, knowing that supplements were another luxury I couldn't afford. After dinner, I excused myself again and went to pack my small suitcase. My train back to Newark wasn't until tomorrow afternoon, but I wanted to be ready. I wanted to be able to leave quickly if the performance of family happiness became too much to bear. As I folded my few belongings, I thought about the woman I'd been at Jessica's age, 38 years old, working double shifts at the textile factory while going to night school to become a medical assistant. I'd been exhausted constantly, my hands permanently stained from the dyes, my back aching from standing over machines for 10 hours a day. But I'd been proud of the life I was building for my children. I remembered Christmas mornings in our tiny apartment when money was so tight that Santa's gifts came from thrift stores and garage sales. Jessica never seemed to mind that her dolls came without original packaging or that her clothes were hand-me-downs from older cousins. She'd been a happy child, creative and loving, delighted by simple pleasures like hot chocolate made with water instead of milk and Christmas cookies made from a tube of store-brand dough. When had that changed? When had the daughter who used to be thrilled by a new box of crayons become a woman who charged her mother for Christmas dinner? When had love become contingent on payment plans and fair share calculations? I thought about my late husband, Jessica's father, who died when she was 12. David had been a dreamer, always convinced that his next business venture would be the one that made us rich. He'd died owing money to half the town, leaving me with 2 children to raise and debts that took me 5 years to pay off. Maybe that's where Jessica had learned to think of everything in terms of profit and loss. Maybe watching her mother struggle financially had taught her that money was the only thing that mattered, the only thing that provided real security. But that understanding didn't make the bill in my purse any easier to accept. It didn't make the knowledge that my presence at family gatherings was being treated like a subscription service any less painful. I finished packing and sat back down on the bed, pulling out the invoice to read it again. $27,438. The number was so large it might as well have been abstract. I made $1,600 a month from Social Security, After rent, utilities, food, and medications, I had maybe $50 left over in a good month. In bad months, when something unexpected came up, I went without. Even with Jessica's generous payment plan of $50 a month, it would take me 45 years to pay off the debt. I'd be 118 years old when I made the final payment, assuming I lived that long and assuming the balance didn't grow with interest, which the fine print suggested it might. The absurdity of it struck me suddenly, and I found myself laughing. Not the warm, joyful laughter of family gatherings, but the bitter, hollow sound of someone who'd been played for a fool. I laughed until tears ran down my cheeks, until my chest ached, until the laughter turned into something that might have been sobbing if I'd allowed it to be. A soft knock on the door interrupted my breakdown. "Mom?" Jessica's voice, muffled, through the wood. "Can I come in?" I wiped my eyes and straightened my shoulders. Of course. She entered hesitantly, still perfect in her cream-colored outfit but with something uncertain in her expression. She sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to wrinkle her clothes, and looked at me with what might have been genuine concern. "I wanted to make sure you understood about the payment arrangement," she said. "I know it probably seems overwhelming, but it's really very reasonable when you break it down. $50 a month is less than most people spend on coffee." I stared at my daughter, this beautiful, successful woman who thought $50 was insignificant. "Jessica," I said carefully, "do you know how much money I have?" She waved a hand dismissively. "I know you're on a fixed income, but everyone our age has to budget carefully. Marcus and I, we look wealthy, but maintaining this lifestyle is expensive. The mortgage alone is $8,000 a month, and then there's the cars, the kids' activities, the country club membership we need for business." "I have $87 in my checking account," I interrupted. $87 to last until my next Social Security check on January 3rd. Jessica's expression flickered, but she rallied quickly. "Well, like I said, the first payment isn't due until January 15th. That gives you time to figure something out." "Figure something out," I repeated. "Jessica, I skip meals to afford my medication. I haven't bought new clothes in 3 years. Last winter, I chose between heating my apartment and buying groceries for 2 weeks." For a moment, my daughter looked genuinely shocked. Then her face hardened into the expression I'd seen when she was a teenager defending some questionable decision. "Mom, that's not my fault. I can't be responsible for your financial choices." "My financial choices." The words hung in the air between us like a physical thing. "Jessica, working double shifts for 30 years so you could have dance lessons. And college money, those were financial choices. Spending my retirement savings on your wedding because you wanted something elegant, that was a financial choice. Lending you $10,000 when you and Marcus started the business, money I never asked you to repay, that was a financial choice." "That was different," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "How was it different?" She stood up, smoothing her outfit, preparing to retreat. "Look, Mom, I'm sorry if this seems harsh, but Marcus and I have worked hard to build this life. We can't keep subsidizing everyone else's lifestyle. If you can't afford to participate in family activities, maybe we need to find less expensive ways to spend time together." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Subsidizing my lifestyle? "Jessica, I live in a 400-square-foot studio apartment and eat pasta 3 nights a week because it's cheap. What lifestyle am I subsidizing?" "I don't want to fight about this," she said, moving toward the door. "The offer is very fair. Take some time to think it over." After she left, I sat in the silence of the guest room and felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, still raw and overwhelming, but underneath it was something else, something harder and colder than grief. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the limited contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Sarah. Chen had been my supervisor when I'd worked as a medical assistant before retiring. She'd also been my friend, one of the few people from my working life who'd stayed in touch. The phone rang 3 times before Sarah answered. Ellie? Is everything okay? It's Christmas night. I'm sorry to call so late, I said. I know it's a holiday, but I have a question. You used to do medical billing, right? Before you became a supervisor? Yes, for about 10 years. Why? If someone sent you a bill for medical services but you'd never been a patient, what would you do? Sarah was quiet for a moment. I'd demand proof of service. Documentation that the services were actually provided and that they were medically necessary. If they couldn't provide that documentation, I'd report them for fraudulent billing. Ellie, what's going on? I told her about the invoice, about Jessica's Christmas gift and her payment plan proposal. When I finished, Sarah was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Ellie, she said finally, her voice tight with anger. That's not just cruel. Depending on how it's structured, it might actually be illegal. You can't bill someone for services they didn't request and never agreed to pay for. She says it's fair, I said, that I should pay my share of family gatherings. Did you ever sign a contract agreeing to pay for these gatherings? Did anyone ever tell you in advance that you'd be charged? No, I thought they were family dinners. Then they were gifts, Sarah said firmly. You can't give someone a gift and then send them a bill after the fact. That's fraud, Ellie. Pure and simple. I felt something inside my chest loosen slightly. Are you sure? I'm sure. Ellie, do you have somewhere safe to keep that invoice? Yes. Good. Keep it safe. And Ellie, don't sign anything. Don't agree to any payment plans, and don't. Let her make you feel guilty about this. What she's doing is wrong, legally and morally. After I hung up, I sat holding the phone and thinking about Sarah's words. Fraud. The words seemed too strong, too legal and official for what was happening between a mother and daughter. But as I thought about it, I realized Sarah was right. I'd never agreed to pay for family gatherings. I'd been invited as a guest, as family, not as a customer. I thought about all the times over the past 3 years when Jessica had called to invite me for holidays. How excited I'd been to be included. How carefully I'd planned my gifts and chosen my outfits. How I'd taken the train from Newark, bringing whatever small contribution I could afford, a pie from the grocery store or a bottle of wine that cost more than I usually spent on a week's worth of food. I'd thought those invitations meant my daughter loved me, wanted me to be part of her life. Now I understood they'd been business transactions. Jessica had been providing a service, and she expected to be paid for it. But I hadn't known I was a customer. I'd thought I was family. I opened the invoice again and read through it more carefully this time, noting details I'd missed in my initial shock. The formatting was professional, with Jessica and Marcus listed as business partners in something called Hayes Family Financial Services. There was a business license number at the bottom, which suggested this wasn't just a one-off demand, but part of some larger enterprise. I wondered if other family members had received similar bills. Jessica's brother Robert, our extended family friends who'd attended gatherings over the years. Had everyone been sent invoices, or was I special? Was I the only one Jessica felt comfortable treating like a deadbeat customer? The more I studied the document, the angrier I became. Not the hot, overwhelming rage I'd felt earlier, but something colder and more calculating. Jessica had put real thought into this. She'd tracked expenses meticulously, calculated what she considered my fair share, and presented it with all the professionalism of a legitimate business transaction. She'd turned our family relationship into a balance sheet, and according to her calculations, I was deep in the red. But there was something Jessica didn't know about her mother. Something she'd forgotten in her rush to reduce our relationship to dollars and cents. I hadn't always been a poor old woman living on Social Security. I'd had another life before retirement, before David's death left me struggling to raise 2 children alone. I'd had skills and knowledge that I'd put aside to focus on being a mother and provider. I'd been good at my job as a medical assistant, particularly the billing and administrative side. I understood medical coding, insurance regulations, and patient rights. I knew how to read contracts and spot fraudulent charges. I knew how to file complaints with regulatory agencies and how to document improper billing practices. Most importantly, I knew how to fight back when someone tried to take advantage of vulnerable people. Jessica might see me as an elderly woman with limited resources and no options. But she was about to learn that underestimating Eleanor Patricia Hayes was a mistake she'd regret for the rest of her life. I spent the rest of Christmas night making notes and planning my next moves. If Jessica wanted to treat our family relationship like a business transaction, then I'd show her exactly how those transactions should be handled. I'd give her a Christmas lesson in customer service, consumer protection, and the consequences of fraudulent billing practices. By the time I finally went to sleep, I was no longer the confused, hurt mother who'd been handed a bill for her daughter's love. I was something else entirely, something harder and more dangerous than Jessica could possibly imagine. My daughter had made the mistake of thinking that poverty meant powerlessness. She was about to learn the difference. I woke the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The guest room was silent except for the distant sound of Jessica's family beginning their post-Christmas routines. I could hear the coffee machine humming to life, the muffled conversations of people who had no idea their carefully constructed world was about to change. I dressed with deliberate care, choosing my most professional-looking outfit. The navy blue pantsuit I'd worn to job interviews years ago still fit, though it showed its age. I pinned my gray hair back in a neat bun and applied lipstick with steady hands. If I was going to war, I would look the part. Downstairs, the kitchen buzzed with the lazy energy of a holiday morning. Marcus was scrolling through his tablet while sipping coffee from a mug that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. Jessica stood at the granite island, organizing what looked like business papers, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail that suggested she was already in work mode despite the holiday. The children were nowhere to be seen, probably sleeping off their Christmas sugar rush in bedrooms that were larger than my entire apartment. The house felt different in the morning light, less like a home and more like a showroom where people performed the roles of a happy family. "Morning, Mom," Jessica said without looking up from her papers. "Coffee's fresh. I was just organizing some year-end business documents. Tax season starts early when you run your own company." I poured myself coffee and sat at the kitchen island, noting the irony that Jessica was doing paperwork for what was apparently a family financial services business I'd never heard of until yesterday. The invoice in my purse suddenly made more sense. This wasn't a one-time demand from a desperate daughter. This was a business operation. "Hayes Family Financial Services," I said, reading the company name from one of the documents spread across the counter. "That's new since my last visit." Jessica glanced up, a flicker of something crossing her face. Pride, maybe, or defensiveness. "We incorporated last year. Marcus has been handling financial planning for some of our friends, and it's grown into a real business. We help families optimize their spending, create accountability systems, things like that." "Accountability systems," I repeated, taking a careful sip of coffee. "Is that what you call it?" Marcus looked up from his tablet for the first time since I'd entered the kitchen. "Mrs. Hayes, I know yesterday might have seemed abrupt, but what we're offering you is actually a service, a way to approach family relationships with transparency and fairness. I studied my son-in-law, this man who'd married my daughter 15 years ago when they were both young and ambitious. He'd been charming then, quick with compliments about my cooking and full of plans for the future he and Jessica would build together. I'd liked him, even been proud that my daughter had found someone who seemed to value family and hard work. Now I saw something else in his face. The cold calculation of someone who viewed everything, including family relationships, as potential profit centers. This had been his idea, I realized. Jessica might have gone along with it, might even have convinced herself it was reasonable, but Marcus was the architect of this scheme. Transparency, I said. That's interesting. Marcus, when exactly did you decide to start charging family members for holiday gatherings? Was it before or after you bought this house? His smile faltered. Slightly. We've always absorbed the costs of hosting, Mrs. Hayes. We're just asking for some contribution to offset expenses. Without telling anyone in advance that they'd be charged. Well, we assumed people understood that hosting costs money. I nodded slowly, as if considering his explanation. So when you invited me for Thanksgiving 3 years ago, and I brought a $20 pie from the grocery store, you expected me to also bring several $100s to cover my share of the meal? Jessica intervened, her voice taking on that bright, dismissive tone she used when conversations became uncomfortable. Mom, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. We're family. We work things out. You're right, I said. We are family. Which is why I'm confused about being treated like a customer who's been dining and dashing for 3 years. I reached into my purse and pulled out the invoice, spreading it on the counter between us. In the bright kitchen light, the document looked even more official, more calculated than it had the night before. I had some time to review this last night, I continued, my voice calm and professional. I have a few questions about the billing practices. Marcus and Jessica exchanged a look, and I could see them trying to determine whether I was going to be reasonable or difficult. They were about to learn that I was going to be something else entirely. For instance, I said, pointing to a line item, Christmas dinner 2022. You've charged me $400 for that meal. Can you provide documentation of what exactly I consumed that cost $400? Mom, it's not just the food, Jessica said. It's the preparation time, the cleaning, the utilities, the wear on the dishes and linens. I see. So you're charging me for your labor as well as materials. What's your hourly rate for cooking and cleaning? Marcus shifted, uncomfortably. Mrs. Hayes, we're not trying to profit from family gatherings. We're just asking for fair compensation for our expenses. Fair compensation, I repeated. Marcus, you're a financial planner. You understand billing practices. Can you show me the documentation that supports these charges? Receipts for food? Purchases? Utility bills that show increased usage during my visits? Depreciation schedules for furniture and linens? The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of expensive appliances. Jessica's papers suddenly seemed to require intense concentration, and Marcus discovered something fascinating on his tablet screen. I didn't think so, I said. Because this isn't a bill based on actual costs. This is an arbitrary number you've assigned to my presence at family gatherings. It's not arbitrary, Jessica protested, though her voice lacked conviction. We calculated based on average hosting costs. Average hosting costs for what? Restaurant meals? Catered events? Jessica, honey, you made a turkey and some side dishes. Even if you'd hired a caterer, it wouldn't have cost $400 per person. I pulled out a small notebook I'd brought from my room and opened it to pages covered with my careful handwriting. Both Jessica and Marcus stared at the notebook as if I'd produced a weapon. I did some research last night, I said. Called a few catering companies in the area. Asked about holiday meal pricing. The most expensive option I found was $150 per person for a full Christmas dinner with service and cleanup included. Your charges are nearly 3 times that amount. You called caterers? Jessica asked, her voice rising slightly. I did. I also looked up some other things. Like the regulations governing billing practices in New Jersey, the consumer protection laws that cover fraudulent charges, the legal requirements for service agreements. The color was beginning to drain from Marcus's face. He set down his tablet and gave me his full attention for the first time since I'd known him. Mrs. Hayes, I think there might be some misunderstanding about our intentions. Oh, I understand your intentions perfectly, I said. You saw an elderly woman on a fixed income and decided she was an easy target for your new business venture. You assumed I'd be too embarrassed or too dependent on family contact to challenge what you were doing. I closed the notebook and smiled. At them, the same polite smile I'd been wearing for years at family gatherings. But now it felt different. Now it felt like armor. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to withdraw this invoice. You're going to acknowledge that family gatherings are gifts, not billable services. And you're going to apologize for attempting to defraud an elderly family member. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Mom, you can't be serious. We're not withdrawing anything. The bill is legitimate. No, Jessica, it's not. But if you want to insist that it is, we can certainly explore that option through proper legal channels. I stood up, gathering my purse and the invoice. I'm going to pack my things now. Marcus, thank you for the coffee. Jessica, we'll talk soon. As I walked toward the stairs, I heard them begin to argue in hushed, urgent whispers. I caught fragments of their conversation. She's bluffing, Marcus was saying. She doesn't have money for lawyers. I don't know, Jessica replied. She seemed different this morning. More. More what? I don't know. Dangerous. I smiled as I climbed the stairs. Dangerous. If only they knew how dangerous I was about to become. In the guest room, I packed methodically, taking care to fold everything neatly despite my eagerness to leave. I'd learned long ago that rushing led to mistakes, and I couldn't afford mistakes now. Everything I did from this point forward had to be calculated and deliberate. I retrieved my phone and made the first of what would be many calls. The number belonged to Robert Chen, Sarah's son, who worked as a paralegal for a law firm that specialized in elder abuse cases. Sarah had given me his contact information years ago, though I'd never imagined I'd need it. Robert, this is Eleanor Hayes, Sarah Chen's friend from the medical center. I hope I'm not disturbing your holiday. Mrs. Hayes, of course not. Mom mentioned you might be calling. She told me a little about your situation. How can I help? I explained about the invoice, reading him some of the line items and describing the circumstances under which it had been presented. Robert listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification about dates or amounts. Mrs. Hayes, he said when I finished. What you're describing sounds like a clear case of fraudulent billing and potentially elder financial abuse. The fact that they incorporated a business to legitimize these charges actually makes it worse. Legally speaking. What are my options? Several. We can file a complaint with the State Attorney General's office. We can report them to the Business Licensing Bureau for fraudulent billing practices. We can contact the IRS about potential tax fraud if they're claiming these family dinners as business expenses. And we can certainly pursue civil action for attempted fraud. I felt that familiar surge of satisfaction I used to get when I'd successfully challenged an improper medical bill. What do you need from me? Everything. The invoice, documentation of your financial situation, records of previous family, gatherings, anything that shows you never agreed to pay for these services. Can you get all of that together? I can do better than that, I said. I can get you evidence that they're running this scheme on other people too. There was a pause. Other people? They mentioned that this is a business, that they help families with accountability systems. I don't think I'm their only target. Mrs. Hayes, if that's true, this could be much bigger than a family dispute. This could be criminal fraud on a significant scale. After I hung up with Robert, I made 2 more calls. One to the New Jersey Division of Consumer Affairs to file a formal complaint about deceptive billing practices. Another to the Better Business Bureau to report Hayes Family Financial Services for fraudulent business practices. By the time I finished my calls, it was nearly noon. I could hear movement downstairs, the sounds of a family trying to return to normal after an uncomfortable morning. I wondered if Jessica and Marcus had told the children about our conversation, or if they were maintaining the pretense that everything was fine. I carried my suitcase downstairs and found the family in the living room. The expensive Christmas decorations that had looked so perfect yesterday now seemed garish, like props in a play that had gone on too long. Jessica was on her phone, probably dealing with work calls. Marcus was at his laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard with the urgency of someone trying to solve a problem. The children looked up from their devices long enough to offer distracted goodbyes. Sophia hugged me briefly, already focused on whatever was happening on her screen. Tyler mumbled something that might have been, "See you later," without removing his gaming headphones. "I'll drive you to the train station," Jessica said, though her tone suggested this was an obligation rather than an offer. "That's very kind," I replied. "We should have time to talk on the way." The drive to the train station took 20 minutes through suburban neighborhoods where every house looked like it belonged in a magazine. Jessica drove in silence, her hands gripping the steering wheel with unnecessary force. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the scenery pass and thinking about all the times I'd made this same journey, always excited to visit my daughter and grandchildren, always grateful to be included in their prosperous life. "Mom," Jessica said finally as we approached the train station, "I hope you'll reconsider your position on this. Marcus and I really are just trying to be fair." "Fair," I repeated. "Jessica, do you remember when you were 12 and wanted to take dance lessons? How I worked extra shifts for 6 months to pay for them? That was different. You were my mother. That was your responsibility. And when you graduated college and wanted an elegant wedding that cost more than I made? In 2 years? Was that my responsibility too?" Jessica's jaw tightened. "You offered to help with the wedding." "I offered because I loved you and wanted you to be happy. Just like you supposedly invited me to family gatherings because you loved me and wanted me to be part of your life." "I do love you, Mom. That's why we're trying to work out a reasonable payment plan instead of demanding everything at once." I turned to look at my daughter, really look at her, trying to find some trace of the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she was sad. "Jessica, honey, do you understand that I can't afford to pay $27,000? Do you understand that $50 a month means I won't be able to buy my blood pressure medication?" For a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw something that might have been guilt flash across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar stubborn expression she'd worn as a teenager when she wanted something I couldn't afford. "Maybe it's time to look into assistance programs," she said. "There are resources for seniors who can't manage financially." "Resources for seniors," I repeated softly. "Jessica, I worked for 45 years. I raised 2 children as a single mother after your father died. I put both of you through college and helped you start your adult lives. And now you're suggesting I should go on welfare so I can afford to pay you for Christmas dinner. I'm suggesting you should take advantage of programs designed to help people in your situation." "My situation? Which is what, exactly?" She pulled into the train station parking lot and stopped the car with more force than necessary. "Your situation is that you're elderly and poor and expecting other people to take care of you." The words hung in the air between us like a physical blow. I sat very still, absorbing the casual cruelty of my daughter's assessment of my life. "Other people," I said. "You mean my family?" "I mean anyone who isn't you. Mom, you can't expect us to subsidize your lifestyle forever." There was that word again. Subsidize. As if my presence at family gatherings was a charitable donation they'd been making out of the goodness of their hearts. "I never asked you to subsidize anything," I said quietly. "I never asked for money, or support, or anything other than the occasional invitation to spend holidays with my grandchildren. And those invitations cost money. Money that we've been paying without any contribution from you." I nodded slowly, finally understanding. This wasn't about fairness or business principles or even money, really. This was about resentment. Jessica resented having to include me in her new life. She resented the reminder that she came from humble beginnings, that her mother was poor and elderly and not an asset to her carefully curated image. The invoice was just a way to get rid of me without having to admit that she was ashamed of her own mother. "I understand now," I said, reaching for the door handle. "Thank you for the clarification." "Mom, wait. Don't be dramatic about this." I turned back to her one last time. "Jessica, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember exactly what you said to me today. Because someday, when you're my age, and depending on your children for love and acceptance, I want you to remember how it feels to be treated like a burden." I got out of the car and retrieved my suitcase from the back seat. Jessica sat behind, the wheel, staring straight ahead, her face set in the stubborn mask that meant she'd convinced herself she was right, and everyone else was being unreasonable. "The invoice stands," she called through the open window. "Payment is due January 15th. I watched her drive away, her expensive car disappearing into traffic, carrying my daughter back to her perfect house and her perfect family, and her business that apparently specialized in billing elderly relatives for the privilege of eating. Christmas dinner. The train ride back to Newark gave me 2 hours to think and plan. I pulled out my notebook and began making lists, names of people to call, documents to gather, steps to take. The methodical process of building a case calmed me, reminded me of the skills I'd developed over decades of challenging improper billing practices in the medical field. Jessica had made a fundamental error in judgment. She'd assumed that because I was poor and elderly, I was also powerless. She'd forgotten that I'd spent 30 years fighting insurance companies and hospital billing departments and pharmaceutical companies that tried to overcharge vulnerable patients. She'd forgotten that I was very, very good at it. My phone rang as the train pulled into Newark Penn Station. The number on the screen belonged to Margaret Russo, my former supervisor from the medical center. Sarah must have called her. "Ellie, I just heard about what happened. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Margaret. Actually, I'm better than fine. I think I might be back in business." "What do you mean?" I stood up and gathered my belongings as the train came to a stop. "I mean, Jessica picked the wrong person to try to defraud. She's about to get a very expensive education in consumer protection law. Ellie, be careful. I know you're angry, but don't do anything that could backfire on you." "Don't worry," I said, stepping onto the platform and into the crowds of holiday travelers. "I'm not going to do anything illegal or unethical. I'm just going to give my daughter exactly what she's been asking for." "Which is what?" I smiled, feeling more energized than I had in years. "A bill." That evening, in my tiny studio apartment, I spread Jessica's invoice across my kitchen table and began to work. I had files full of documentation from my years as a medical assistant, templates for challenging improper charges, contact information for regulatory agencies and consumer protection organizations. I had something else too. I had experience with medical billing fraud cases, knowledge of how to document patterns of abuse, and connections with people who specialized in protecting vulnerable populations from predatory billing practices. Most importantly, I had time. Jessica might think I had nothing but poverty and age working against me, but she was wrong. I had time, and I had purpose, and I had 45 years of experience fighting people who thought they could take advantage of those who couldn't fight back. I opened my laptop, an ancient machine that took 5 minutes to boot up but still worked well enough for basic tasks. I began typing the first of what would be many letters, reports, and formal complaints. Jessica wanted to treat our family relationship like a business transaction. She was about to learn that business transactions worked both ways, and I was about to show her exactly what it cost to destroy a family. The war she'd started on Christmas morning was just beginning. But she'd made a critical error in strategy. She'd assumed she was fighting a helpless old woman who had no choice but to accept whatever terms she offered. Instead, she was fighting Eleanor Patricia Hayes, former medical billing specialist and consumer protection advocate. And Eleanor Patricia Hayes had never lost a fight with people who tried to defraud vulnerable patients. She wasn't about to start now. The first response came faster than I expected. 3 days after New Year's, my phone rang at 8 in the morning. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Mrs. Hayes? This is Detective Carmen Rodriguez with the New Jersey State Police Financial Crimes Unit. We received your complaint about Hayes Family Financial Services, and we'd like to schedule an interview. I set down my coffee cup, feeling a surge of satisfaction. Of course, Detective. When would be convenient? How about this afternoon? We're very interested in what you've reported, and we think there might be a pattern here that extends beyond your personal situation. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was sitting in a conference room at the State Police Barracks, facing Detective Rodriguez and Assistant District Attorney Michael Chen. Yes, Robert Chen's older brother. Small world, and sometimes that worked in your favor. Mrs. Hayes, Detective Rodriguez began, we've received multiple complaints about Hayes Family Financial Services in the past 6 months. Your complaint was the most detailed, which is why we wanted to speak with you first. She opened a thick file folder and spread several documents across the table. I recognized the format immediately. They were invoices, all bearing the same letterhead as the one Jessica had given me, all addressed to different people. The Martinelli family, Detective Rodriguez said, pointing to one invoice, charged $8,000 for hosting their elderly mother during a family reunion. The Patel family charged $12,000 for including their grandfather in holiday celebrations. The Kowalski family charged $15,000 for allowing their aging aunt to live with them during her cancer treatment. I studied the documents, noting the professional formatting, the detailed line items, the payment terms that were identical to mine. This wasn't a family dispute that had gotten out of hand. This was a systematic fraud operation targeting vulnerable elderly people. How many families? I asked. So far, we've documented 37 cases, Ada Chen replied. Total attempted. Billings of over $400,000. And those are just the ones who've come forward. How did they find these families? Detective Rodriguez pulled out another folder. Your daughter and son-in-law have been very clever. They target families through social media, specifically Marcus's financial planning business. He offers free financial consultations, gets invited to family gatherings as a guest, then later sends bills claiming the families owe money for hosting expenses. They use their legitimate business as a front, Ada Chen added. Marcus provides actual financial planning services to establish credibility, then Jessica handles what they call family financial mediation. Oh, they present themselves as helping families establish fair cost sharing for caregiving and social obligations. I shook my head, amazed at the scope of what my daughter had created. And people pay these bills? Some do, Detective Rodriguez said grimly. Especially elderly people who are afraid of being cut off from their families. We estimate they've collected about $60,000 so far. What happens now? Now we build a case, Ada Chen said. We need detailed statements from victims, financial records, evidence of the systematic nature of the fraud. Mrs. Hayes, would you be willing to help us? What would that involve? Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. We'd like you to continue communicating with your daughter. Let her think you're considering paying the bill. We need evidence of how they operate, how they pressure victims, what they say when people can't pay. The idea of pretending to negotiate with Jessica made my stomach turn, but I understood the necessity. You want me to record our conversations? With your consent, yes. New Jersey is a one-party consent state, so you can legally record conversations you're part of without informing the other party. I thought about Jessica's voice on Christmas morning, so casual as she handed me a bill for loving her. I'll do it. They gave me a small recording device and clear instructions on how to use it. They also gave me scripts for what to say. To Jessica, how to sound confused and desperate. How to play the role of a victim who was slowly breaking down under financial pressure. It felt like justice, turning Jessica's manipulation back on itself. That evening, I called my daughter. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with false concern. "Mom, I was just thinking about you. How are you settling in after the holidays?" "I'm struggling, Jessica," I said, following the script Detective Rodriguez had given me. "I've been looking at my finances, trying to figure out how to handle the payment plan." "Oh, good. I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. Marcus and I really want to work with you. The thing is, I don't think I can manage $50 a month. My medication costs went up, and the electric bill was higher than usual this month." There was a pause, and I could almost hear Jessica calculating. "Well, what do you think you could manage? Maybe $25 a month? I know it would take longer to pay off, but it's really all I can afford." $25. Jessica's voice had cooled slightly. "Mom, that would mean you'd be paying for over 90 years. That's not really feasible." "I don't know what else to do, honey. I've looked into selling some of my belongings, but I don't have anything valuable." "What about assistance programs, social services? There are resources for people in your situation." I tried calling a few places, but the waiting lists are very long. And honestly, Jessica, it's embarrassing, having to ask for help to pay my own daughter. I heard Marcus's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. When Jessica came back on the line, her tone had hardened. "Mom, I understand this is difficult, but we have our own financial obligations. Marcus thinks maybe we should transfer your account to a collection agency. They might be more flexible with payment arrangements." A collection agency. They were threatening to send their own mother to collections. I closed my eyes and continued playing my role. "Please don't do that, Jessica. Those people can be very aggressive. Isn't there some other way we can work this out?" "Well," Jessica said, and I could hear the calculation in her voice. "There might be one option. Marcus has been working with other families in similar situations. Elderly parents who can't afford to contribute to family expenses but want to maintain relationships with their children." "What kind of option?" "It's called a family financial mediation service. Instead of you owing us money directly, Marcus's company would handle the debt and work out a more manageable payment schedule. The interest rates are very reasonable, and they're much more understanding about fixed incomes." I nearly laughed. Out loud. They were trying to trap me in an even more elaborate scheme, probably one that would involve signing contracts and legal documents that would make their fraud even harder to escape. "That sounds complicated," I said. "Would I have to sign papers?" "Just a simple agreement outlining the payment terms. Very standard stuff. Marcus deals with this kind of thing all the time." "Could you send me some information about it? I'd like to understand what I'd be agreeing to." "Of course, I'll have Marcus put together a packet for you." "Mom, I really think this is the best solution for everyone. You'll have manageable payments, and we'll have the security of knowing the debt will be handled professionally." After I hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment and thought about the conversation I'd just recorded. Jessica had not only confirmed that she was willing to send her own mother to collections, but she'd also revealed that Marcus was running an even larger operation, specifically targeting elderly parents who couldn't afford to pay these fraudulent bills. I called Detective Rodriguez immediately. "Mrs. Hayes, this is excellent. Your daughter just described exactly what we suspected. Marcus is running a predatory lending scheme alongside the fraudulent billing. He creates the fake debt, then offers to help families manage it through his financial services company, probably at usurious interest rates." "How many more people are they hurting?" "We're finding out. Mrs. Hayes, would you be willing to meet with Marcus? Let him present his solution to you in person? We could wire your apartment, get everything on video. The thought of having Marcus in my home, pretending to help me while actually trying to defraud me further, made my skin crawl. But I thought about all those other families, all those other elderly people who might not have the knowledge or resources to fight back. Set it up. The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday. Marcus arrived at my apartment building at exactly 2 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a suit that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 6 months. I watched from my window as he got out of his BMW and looked around, the modest neighborhood with obvious distaste. I had spent the morning preparing. The recording equipment was hidden but active. Detective Rodriguez and 2 other officers were positioned in an unmarked van across the street. I was wearing a small camera disguised as a brooch, feeling like a character in a spy movie. Marcus knocked on my door with the confidence of a man who thought he was about to close an easy deal. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his smile broad and practiced. "Thank you so much for agreeing to meet. I think we can really help each other here." I invited him in, offering coffee, which he declined, and we sat at my small kitchen table. Marcus opened his briefcase with a flourish, pulling out professionally printed brochures and contract forms. "Now, as Jessica explained, you're having some difficulty managing the family contribution fees," he began. "That's completely understandable. Many people on fixed incomes find themselves in similar situations." "Family contribution fees?" I repeated. "Is that what you call them?" "It's a more accurate term than bill," Marcus said smoothly. "What we're really talking about is a fair distribution of family support costs. When families get together, especially for major holidays or life events, there are always expenses involved. Food, preparation time, facility costs, cleanup. It's only fair that everyone contributes according to their ability." He slid a brochure across the table. The cover showed a happy multi-generational family gathered around a dinner table, with the headline, "Fair Family Financial Solutions," in elegant script. "The problem," Marcus continued, "is that these conversations about money can be awkward within families. That's where our mediation services come in. We handle the financial arrangements professionally, removing the emotional component from necessary business discussions." I flipped through the brochure, noting the testimonials from satisfied families and the professional language that made fraud sound like a social service. "This sounds very official," I said. "Do you work with a lot of families?" "Oh, yes. We have clients throughout New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania. The demand for this kind of service has been tremendous. So many families are struggling with the financial aspects of caregiving and social obligations." Marcus pulled out a contract and placed it in front of me. "Now, what I'm proposing for your situation is very straightforward. Instead of owing Jessica and Marcus directly, you'd enter into a payment agreement with Hayes Family Financial Services. We'd take over the debt at a reduced amount, say $20,000 instead of the full $27,000, and set up a payment plan you can actually manage. $20,000 is still a lot of money for me. Of course, which is why we're offering very favorable terms. Payments of just $30 a month, and we can start with a 6-month grace period to give you time to adjust your budget." I pretended to study the contract while actually reading it very carefully. The language was designed to sound helpful while actually creating a binding legal obligation that would be much harder to escape than Jessica's original invoice. "What's the interest rate?" I asked. Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "Very reasonable. Just 12% annually, which is actually below market rate for unsecured personal loans. 12% on a $20,000 debt that was completely fabricated." I calculated quickly in my head. At $30 a month, I'd be paying for over 100 years, and the total amount paid would be more than double the original. Fraudulent charges. "And if I can't make the payments?" "Well, we'd work with you, of course, but the contract does include standard collection provisions, wage garnishment, asset seizure, that sort of thing. All very standard for financial agreements. Asset seizure. Marcus was threatening to take my belongings if I couldn't pay his fraudulent bill. I looked around my tiny apartment, at the second-hand furniture and bargain store decorations that represented everything I owned in the world, and felt a cold rage settle in my chest. This seems like a very complex solution to what started as a family dinner, I said carefully. Marcus leaned forward, his salesman instincts kicking in. Mrs. Hayes, I understand this might seem overwhelming, but think about the alternative. Jessica is hurt and disappointed that you haven't taken responsibility for your share of family expenses. This agreement shows that you're serious about being a contributing member of the family. And if I don't sign? His smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Well, that would be unfortunate. Jessica would have no choice but to pursue other options. Collection agencies, small claims court, that sort of thing. Very unpleasant for everyone involved. Collection agencies for Christmas dinner. For family contribution fees that have gone unpaid for several years, Marcus corrected smoothly. Mrs. Hayes, I hope you understand that this isn't personal. This is simply about fairness and accountability. I nodded slowly, as if considering his offer. Could I have some time to think about this? Maybe show the contract to someone who understands legal documents better than I do? Marcus's expression tightened slightly. Of course you can review it, but I should mention that this offer is time-sensitive. We have other clients waiting for our services, and we can't hold terms open indefinitely. How much time do I have? Let's say 1 week. If you haven't signed by next Friday, we'll have to explore other options. After Marcus left, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the contract he'd tried to pressure me into signing. The document was a masterpiece of predatory lending, designed to trap vulnerable people in a cycle of debt for money they'd never actually owed in the first place. I called Detective Rodriguez immediately. We got everything, she assured me. Video, audio, documentation of the entire scheme. Mrs. Hayes, what you just did was incredibly brave. What happens now? Now we arrest them. The arrests happened the following Tuesday morning. I wasn't there to see it, but Detective Rodriguez called me afterwards to describe the scene. Marcus had been taken into custody at his office, in front of several clients who were apparently unaware that their financial advisor was running a fraud operation on the side. Jessica was arrested at home, in front of Sophia and Tyler, who filmed the entire encounter for their social media accounts. Both were charged with multiple counts of fraud, elder abuse, and operating an unlicensed lending business. The charges carried potential sentences of up to 15 years in prison. The local news picked up the story that evening. I watched from my couch as a reporter stood outside Jessica's beautiful colonial house and described the elaborate scheme to defraud elderly family members through fake billing practices. The house looked different on television, less impressive, somehow more like a stage set for a play that had ended badly. My phone started ringing almost immediately. Reporters wanting interviews, neighbors who suddenly remembered my name, distant relatives who claimed they'd always suspected something was wrong with Jessica. I let them all go to voicemail. The call I did answer came from Robert, my son in California. Mom, I just saw the news. Are you okay? Why didn't you tell me what was happening? I didn't want to worry you, honey. I thought I could handle it. Myself. Handle it yourself? Mom, Jessica tried to steal $30,000 from you. That's not something you handle yourself. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Actually, Robert, I think I handled it pretty well. There was a pause. You're the one who turned them in, aren't you? I'm the one who refused to be a victim. Over the next few weeks, more details of the scheme came to light. Hayes family. Financial services had attempted to collect over $400,000 from elderly victims across 3 states. Marcus had been operating without proper licensing, charging illegal interest rates, and using his legitimate financial planning business to identify potential targets. Jessica had been the point person for what they called family relationship management, using her skills in social media and communication to manipulate victims into feeling guilty about challenging the fraudulent bills. The investigation revealed that they'd been planning to expand the operation, franchise it to other couples who could target their own communities and family networks. They'd created training materials, marketing strategies, and legal frameworks for what they called accountability-based family financial services. They'd turned elder abuse into a business plan. The civil lawsuit started almost immediately. Families who had paid the fraudulent bills sued to recover their money. Elderly victims who had been traumatized by the scheme sued for emotional distress. The state sued to recover investigation costs and penalties. Jessica and Marcus lost their house within 2 months. Their business accounts were frozen, their assets seized, their professional licenses revoked. The children moved in with Marcus's parents, their social media accounts documenting their dramatic fall from affluent suburban life to the kind of modest circumstances I'd lived in my entire life. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering. I felt no vindication in watching my daughter's perfect life collapse. I felt only the quiet peace that comes from knowing that justice had been served, that other families had been protected from the scheme that had started with a Christmas morning. Bill for $27,000. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 2 days, describing the Christmas morning when Jessica had handed me the invoice, the recorded phone conversations where she'd threatened to send me to collections, the meeting where Marcus had tried to pressure me into signing a predatory loan agreement. Jessica's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive mother who had destroyed her own family over a simple misunderstanding about holiday expenses. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings were clear. The pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly people was undeniable. Jessica was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Marcus got 12 years as the primary architect of the scheme. They were also ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, though most of us knew we'd never see that money. After the sentencing, I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot and thought about the little girl who used to help me make cookies from store-bought dough, who used to practice dance routines in our tiny living room, who used to tell me she wanted to be just like me when she grew up. Somewhere along the way, that little girl had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who could look at her elderly mother and see only a potential source of income, someone who could build a business around exploiting the people who should be able to trust her most. I drove home to my studio apartment, where I made myself a cup of tea and sat down to read the letters I'd been receiving from other victims of the scheme. Elderly people thanking me for my courage, family members grateful that the fraud had been exposed, social workers and elder care advocates asking me to speak about my experience. I thought about Detective Rodriguez's words on the day of the arrests. What you just did was incredibly brave. But I didn't feel brave. I felt like someone who had simply refused to accept an unacceptable situation. I felt like someone who had remembered that poverty didn't mean powerlessness, that age didn't mean helplessness, that family should never mean exploitation. I felt like Eleanor Patricia Hayes, former medical billing specialist and consumer protection advocate, the woman who had never lost a fight with people who tried to defraud vulnerable patients, the woman who had just won the most important fight of her life. 6 months later, I received a letter in prison stationery, Jessica's handwriting, though shakier than I remembered. "Mom," it began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did wrong. The other women here, when they heard my story, they couldn't believe I had treated my own mother that way. I'm getting counseling, and I'm working on understanding how I became someone who could do what I did to you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I'm truly, deeply sorry." I read the letter twice, then put it in a drawer with the other documents from the case. Someday, maybe, I would be ready to respond. Someday, maybe, I would be able to forgive the daughter who had tried to bill me for her love. But not today. Today, I had other things to do. I was volunteering with the State Elder Protection Agency, helping other victims of financial fraud understand their rights and options. I was speaking at community centers and senior centers about recognizing predatory schemes. I was using the skills I'd developed over a lifetime of fighting improper billing practices to help other people avoid the trap my daughter had set for me. I was living the life Eleanor Patricia Hayes was meant to live, not as a victim of other people's greed, but as a protector of those who needed protection. Not as someone who accepted injustice, but as someone who fought back against it. Jessica had given me a bill for $27,000 on Christmas morning, expecting me to pay it quietly and gratefully. Instead, I had given her a lesson in the true cost of betraying family. The bill for that lesson was 8 years in prison and the loss of everything she had built through fraud and manipulation. Unlike her invoice, mine had been paid in full. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.